Hello again and welcome to another edition of the CAI Report. I'm Mike Livingston. I'm the host of the show and I'm also the current president of the Coachella Valley chapter of CAI, Community Associations Institute. It's a national body of education for homeowners, managers, and vendors, all relative to community associations, common interest developments, condominiums, planned unit developments, and hopefully you as a homeowner that are watching this program fit into one of those categories. Today my guest is Mary Howell, Esquire, from the firm of Epstein, Grinnell & Howell, name right on the door there. Glad to have you aboard again here, Mary. It's very rare that we can get somebody to break you away from your schedule. You're so busy and is so in demand. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
You may recognize Mary from the attorneyship of your homeowners association. She speaks all down the coast of California, seminars and what have you. And today, again, I'm lucky to have her with us as our guest. We're going to be discussing today a very, very large and far-reaching issue specifically here to our valley, but all over California right now, and that's relative to developer turnover.
Right.
Developer turnover is something that, again, with all of the expansion and all of the building that's going on in California, a lot here in the Coachella Valley, I think you can't hit a golf ball or throw a stone anywhere here in the Coachella Valley without seeing a new home development going up. People tell me that the home market is cooling. I find that hard to believe with all the hammers I see.
Sure doesn't look like it out here.
No, with all the hammers and bulldozers and things that I see and hear. But with all of these developments come issues relative to people moving into developments, and with that comes its own set of circumstances, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And it's funny. It's such a cyclic thing, the market is. I've been around for 30 years now, and I saw it when it cooled off before, and I expect to see some of those same things arise as the market possibly cools even out here. But you're right. We see a common list of issues that arise typically at the time of developer turnover. I used to teach a class on this called Dancing with the Gorilla. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that you've got a developer who typically has a huge voting majority during the development process. That's one of the issues, calculating the developer voting rights, when they terminate, which class they are, assessment issues, turnover of common property issues, sales representations or misrepresentations by the developer, warranty servicing by the developer, SB 800 and Calderon and construction defect issues. All of those are typical issues that an emerging or evolving homeowners association will encounter as the developer completes its sales process and begins to move out. Another area people should be aware of is if this market goes like past markets have, we may see an upsurge in developer failures. And then issues come out like, what rights does a successor developer who comes in and purchases from a foreclosing bank have? Mm-hmm. What are the bankruptcy implications if a developer goes into bankruptcy? Who's going to service the warranties? How are we going to get our assessments? Do we have to be in bankruptcy court? And the answer is yes, sometimes you do. So it's a whole range of issues, but the good news is there are issues that have happened before, and we can predict pretty much how they should be resolved.
Wow, my head is spinning with all of that. However, we're going to break those down and talk a little bit about some of them. You're a new homeowner and you've just bought in a brand new development. It's a gated community and you're going to be subject to all of the things that come with any other common interest development as if you had bought into one that's been built for a while. Brings with it its own nuances and its own state of affairs, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. From the individual purchaser's perspective, you want to hope that the developer has given you an adequate warranty, made provisions for enforcing it. You want to take a look at the documents, which presumably you're going to get. And you want to make sure that the developer represented correctly what your rights are, what your obligations are to the homeowners association. Again, as an individual homeowner, you also want to take a close look at the white paper or final subdivision report, which is part of the purchase package. That gives you very basic information about the structure of the homeowners association and issues that might affect you in nearby locales. The association, homeowner-dominated board, as it begins to merge, has a different set of issues with the developer typically. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking a little bit before the show about that. Again, Did the developer make adequate representations? What's the condition of the real property that you're going to receive, the common area that you're going to receive? There are bonds for completion of those improvements. And one of the issues is going to be what the CCNRs tell you is your time frame for evaluating the condition of the real property and releasing those bonds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've just, and one of the things you just mentioned, salespeople, and then you went into some of the common area things. There's a very, very big difference, division, and sometimes a discrepancy when you talk about salespeople v. Homeowners association. Again, if you were to drive down the street and move into an association that's been there for a long time, it's pretty well clear cut. You've got your CCNRs, your bylaws, you've got your board of directors, and they've been operating as a homeowners association now for 10 years, and that's its own operation. You move into an association that's going to be 200 units and it's only halfway built and filled out, that's a completely different animal, and I like that dancing with the gorilla. That's funny. I'm going to use that. At Personalized Property Management, where I'm the Director of Management, we deal with, I believe, 9 different developers right now. So we have a separate division that does nothing but developer transition, and we're pretty well familiar with that. So I know a lot of the nuances and the issues, and I'll even go as far as to say problems that can arise with dealing with some of those particular complexities. That being said, there is one thing that I think the homeowners out there that buy into new developments are experiencing right now, and that is the very real issue of the developer himself, until a certain point in time, is the president of the board, or they retain control of that board until a certain number of seats or units are sold, and the homeowners take control of that association. That being said, the developer not only is there to sell units as a salesperson, business person, that's his business, but also has an incumbent responsibility to manage or oversee the homeowners association, which is a completely separate business that is going to be there and operate well after he's gone. And I know we're going to talk about that in detail, as it's going to be the primary focus of our discussion when we come back. We're going to be back with you in just a moment. I'm Mike Livingston. This is Mary Howell. Stay with us on the CAI Report.
CAI Report is brought to you by Bright & Clean Windows. Trust Southern California's favorite window cleaning company to provide consistent, quality window cleaning service to your home and office. Let Bright & Clean Windows make you look great by removing hard water stains from windows and shower door enclosures, and by cleaning windows and mirrors to a gleaming shine. Call 346-9274. High-rise living in the desert. Located at the corner of Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope Drives is the Desert Island Condominium Community. 226 luxury homes within 3 buildings on an island surrounded by a 25-acre lake. Come find out why high-rise living is so enjoyable. Call 760-324-1871.
Hey Tim, what's this I hear about your sponsorship with CAI doing so well?
My sponsorship in the television show?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it's one of the best things I've done for the CAI, besides being a volunteer, that is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So is it helping you?
Well, it's helping me and it's helping my bottom line. I'm getting customers, I'm making money.
What a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And you can have that opportunity too. Give a call to the CAI office so you can be a sponsor on our CAI report. The telephone number is 760-341-0559. Hello, Stephen Shuey here. I want to interrupt this program for just a minute before we go back to our regular show and talk to you, boards of directors members, just for a brief few minutes about something very important to you, and that is the hiring of licensed and insured contractors. It's extremely important when you're working in a homeowners association that all of the people who come to work on your property for the association are licensed and insured. You know, you can save money in some places in the budget, but you don't want to save money when it comes to a choice between one contractor or another. One's licensed, one's not, or one's insured and one's not. You really need to have licensed and insured contractors. The saving of a few dollars is not going to be worth it in the long run. Those people who have saved money because the party wasn't a licensed contractor have found that they end up with a job that's not quite satisfactory. It looks beautiful when it's first finished, but it doesn't last near as long as that job that might have cost a few more dollars and been done by a licensed contractor. The same thing applies to insured contractors. Wouldn't it be awful if somebody you hired, say, to do tree trimming, had fallen out of a tree and hurt themselves badly and you come to find out they didn't have proper insurance. The association ends up paying for a long time to come. It's critically important. Always hire licensed and insured contractors. Thank you. Now back to our show.
And we're back on the CAI Report. Mike Livingston and you. Today, Mary Howell from the firm of Epstein, Grinnell & Howell is our guest. Glad to have you aboard, Mary, as usual.
Thank you.
We are talking about a very real and sensitive issue here in the Coachella Valley specifically, and that is developer turnover. A lot of homeowners moving into new developments. Again, you can't look anywhere here in the valley, south, north, west, east, without seeing a brand new development. And that means people are moving in. I've heard some staggering statistics as far as how many people are moving to the valley every day. But most of what you see are common interest developments being built.
Correct.
That being said, all of the people hopefully watching the show are going to not going to be immune from what we're going to be talking about right now, and are going to be susceptible.
I think it'll be timely. If not now, certainly in their near future.
Okay, so what we were talking about before the break was the different hats that the developer himself is going to be wearing during this process of the build out of the community. So we were talking about theoretically a 200-unit property that's only halfway built and sold, and the fact that the developer is obviously there for his business to sell units and homes. At the same time, he has an incumbent responsibility to serve as the operator, president, what have you, of the oversight of the homeowners association, which is going to be there theoretically long after he is gone and out of there as the salesperson. Having worked with as many developers as I have and currently do, that is oftentimes something that falls to the bottom rung, in my opinion, of the priority ladder of that developer. Did I say that?
Nicely?
Yeah.
Politically correctly? Possibly. I think it depends very much on the developer.
Mm-hmm.
But it is true that there is an inherent conflict because the developer and its officers and agents are there for profit. Whereas when they assume the position of directors and officers of a homeowners association, they also assume a fiduciary responsibility to the individual homeowners and to the association. The classic example occurred in a case called Ravens Cove, where the developer came in, sold all the units, and neglected to fund the reserves. I mean, that obviously dug into his bottom line, so he simply chose not to do it. And the court pointed out that the developer in that position wears two hats, but he cannot serve two masters. And if the developer's people end up manning the board, they are responsible for putting the association's interests first. So reserve issues is one of the areas where it comes into conflict. Oftentimes you'll get simply inattention. Developers tend to appoint some of their employees to sit on boards, and it becomes a sporadic board attendance because if it's just not convenient, they're not going to come. Architectural decisions don't get made because meetings don't get held. Other pressing business doesn't get taken care of because it falls very low on the list. So it never hurts to remind the developer that the developer must put the association's well-being above the profit margin or the bottom line in a case such as that.
Now back to my previous statement, I will say some developers are much better than others on this. Some are very, very good. And you talk about their individual staff and what have you. I think that's the key. In the different development companies that we've worked with, some have specific staff to do just this, and they're very, very well organized on that.
Another issue is the divide within a development company, typically between the construction part of the company and the sales part of the company, because most of them use an in-house sales force. The sales people are not as attuned to the fiduciary issues as the portion of the company which mans the boards and provides board support. So you'll get a situation where the sales representatives will read the documents rather loosely or not at all. They'll say, oh, it doesn't matter, go ahead and put that gazebo in even though we have a rule against it, or yes, you can park there even though we have a rule against it, and the sale goes down, and then you get a situation where the association later on says, well, that's in violation of the rule, and the homeowner says, but the developer told me I could do it.
Right.
Classic example.
We've come across that several different times, and there's not a lot you can do about it because you're going to ultimately have an unhappy homeowner. At the same time, you have documents that were in place when they bought, are going to continue to be in place throughout, as I said, the existence of the homeowners association that homeowner is going to be bound by, and they're dealing with what they were told.
I would say it's a case of disappointed expectations, but there is some good news for the homeowners association seeking to enforce, and that is the Woodridge case. In the Woodridge case, a board gave permission to do something that the documents clearly said couldn't be done, and the court said it doesn't matter, the homeowner should have read the documents and realized that that was an inappropriate grant of authority. So if the developer's salespeople mistakenly allow something which is specifically precluded by the governing documents, the same logic should apply, and the association ought to be able to say, you can't do that, even if the developer presumably did say so.
And this is what I personally, as both a buyer of a home and or a manager in this, find unfortunate, simply because although you're right, although Woodbridge is what it is, I think human nature would tell you, if you're in there and you're looking at a brand new $500,000 house and you're really excited about, hey, can I do this? And that person says, oh, absolutely, that you're going to be pretty disappointed when you find out you can't.
Oh, I think they're disappointed or expectations. But on the other hand, I think that a homeowner buying in has a duty to review the documents and be aware of them. I think that's what the law assumes that homeowner should do. So yes, as a practical day-to-day matter, there may be unhappiness, but as a legal matter, they're supposed to comply with the documents.
So as a message, not unlike anything else, whether you're buying in a new community or a community that's already in existence, treat it the same way, i.e. the documents are going to stand and you're obligated to those documents, whether it's a brand new place or whether it's been in existence for a while, simply because those documents are going to run with the property far after that developer's gone.
I guess we could say that the documents take precedence over representations by the developer.
Now, also relative to what we're talking about with developer issues, a lot of times, part and parcel to the developer and their team getting the property up and running, they'll also employ a management company somewhat early on in the going to begin the process of the management of the homeowners association. And when we come back from our next break, I want to talk about that briefly, simply because, again, with the developer wearing two hats between, in this case, between the developer and the overall president, let's say, or the guidance of the board of directors, sometimes early on in the going, I have found that not all governing documents, i.e. rules and regulations, architectural violations, things like that, are enforced to the level that they normally would be in another HOA or will be in that HOA into the future.
Right, so does the developer's failure to take action bind the association later on?
I think that that's something, again, that I've seen, and I want to talk a little bit more about that when we come back from our next break. Mary Howell from Epstein, Grinnell & Howell is my guest. I'm Mike Livingston for the CAI Reoprt. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Diamond Fusion, a patented award-winning technology that transforms ordinary shower glass and porcelain into low-maintenance surfaces, used by manufacturers like DuPont and by homeowners and resorts to maintain a clean image and save money while making life easier by making cleaning easier. Call 773-2825.
Hey Tim, what's this I hear about your sponsorship with CAI doing so well?
My sponsorship in the television show?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it's one of the best things I've done for the CAI, besides being a volunteer, that is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So is it helping you?
Well, it's helping me and it's helping my bottom line. I'm getting customers, I'm making money.
What a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And you can have that opportunity too. Give a call to the CAI office so you can be a sponsor on our CAI report. The telephone number is 760-341-0559.
Communication is the key to successful homeowner association management. BestHOA.com specializes in creating websites that serve as the ultimate in communication tools. Taking advantage of technology to help association managers and board members efficiently and promptly deliver information is what BestHOA.com does best. Call BestHOA.com.
Whoa, check out the action on the net.
No, Oscar, stay away from the net.
Not net, internet.
Wow, it's so fast.
That's because it's Roadrunner high-speed internet service. It blows everything else away.
Hello, what's that?
All right, he's looking for another fish.
Oh, click buy, click buy.
So, you're from eBay.
Is that anywhere near Chesapeake Bay?
Hello, I'm Stephen Shuey. I want to talk to you just for a few moments about the budget process. You know, if you're on the board of directors for your homeowners association, setting that budget's a pretty critical thing, I know. is a kind of a fine line between making the budget right for your homeowners who never want to see increases and having a budget that's set correctly so you can afford to get the jobs done you need to have done. My recommendation is set the budget correctly for the jobs you want to have done. Your homeowners will be happy. They may groan a little bit at the first sight of an increase, but in the long run, you need to have increases to keep up with the cost of living. Do what's right.
And we're back on the CAI Report. Mike Livingston and you. Mary Howell from the firm of Epstein and Grinnell, and Howell is my guest today. Glad to have you aboard as usual.
Thank you.
We are talking about developer transition in an HOA here in the Coachella Valley, as you know. New developments going on all over the place, and that is why this topic is going to be so critical now and in the next several years. One of the things we were talking about before the break is the division and the two hats, if you will, that the developer wears early on in the process between selling homes and being in charge of the operation of an HOA. Oftentimes, Mary, early on that the developer will have a different side of his operation that will oversee the HOA and or employ a management company early on. But one of the things that we have found, or I have found dealing with some of the development companies that I have dealt with, is that a lot of times the developer, obviously for different reasons, sales purposes or whatever, will not enforce early on during his tenure the governing documents or architectural guidelines, rules and regulations to the extent that the other homeowners will later on. And for example, basketball hoops being out, parking violations, things like that. I have found, being a manager, that puts the management company in a bad light early on as far as, well, you know, you're the management company. Aren't you doing anything? Aren't you seeing any of this? Whereas the management company still has to report to the board of directors as they would in a development that's already been in place for a long time. Well, in the case of a developer transition association, the board of directors that I as a manager would be reporting to is the developer, who might not want to, although he should, pursue or be as hard on the person that he just sold the home to as one of his neighbors would be to keep the community pristine.
Right, and we talked earlier about the Woodbridge case and the ability of the association to go back in after the fact and say, you should have known better. But in addition, almost all sets of governing documents have what's called a non-waiver clause. And essentially it says that the failure of the board to enforce on any given occasion will not preclude or prevent it from enforcing in the future. That's a good thing to know. The other thing is simply to remind the developer from time to time that it cannot blithely make representations or promises when those simply violate the governing documents or the norms of the community. Mm-hmm. So those are ways that then a homeowner-dominated successor board can move into a stronger enforcement issue. You still have to pay attention to the 6 o'clock news rule. If it's been a violation of long-standing and it's very obvious, you may not want to do it because you'll show up on the 6 o'clock news. Nevertheless, enforcement should be the norm rather than the exception.
Absolutely. Okay, well, what are some of the other issues that we would want the general public to know, as we have a few minutes left here, relative to the nuances of developer transition?
One of the primary things I think the new homeowner-dominated board should consider doing is appointing a transition team, a committee specifically empowered to deal with the developer on turnover issues.
Made up of homeowners?
Made up of homeowners and potentially consultants as well, pursuant to a corporate resolution defining their rights and their duties. That transition team in turn should be responsible for securing certain documents that you'll need, like copies of warranties for common area issues, doing a punch list for defects in the common area that you want repaired pursuant to the developer's responsibility, insurance policies that the association may have had during a period of developer domination. Again, those insurance policies are still relevant. We may have to make claims long after the developer's gone, so we want those policies. Contracts with vendors. We want to be sure we've got those contracts. We may need to go after the vendor. We may need to pursue them. We may need an attorney's fee clause. As-built plans, always a hot topic. Developers don't want to give them, but we want them. Many developers are honorable, and they will provide the as-built plans as something that the association will need in order to make repairs in the future. Mm-hmm. Ironing out any governing document idiosyncrasies. Those are issues that will need to be developed, and as long as the developer is still there, we can maybe have the developer on its ticket take care of those problems. Assessment arrearages. Consider that there's an assessment bond for 6 months worth of assessments, and consider also that you can apply to the DRE, complain to them that there's been a failure on the part of the developer to pay. On-site and off-site improvement bonds can provide a source of funds for the completion of common area improvements if the developer is failing financially. Also, on the issue of failing financially, assume that you've got a situation where the developer's just bitten off more than it can chew and it's going down. At some point, the lender may foreclose and sell to a new developer, or the developer itself may choose to sell to a new developer. At that point, certain issues arise. To what extent is the new developer subject to architectural control? That should be spelled out in the documents, but you may need to do a spot of research. If the developer is in arrears on assessments more than the assessment bond will cover, you may have to go into bankruptcy court and make a claim in a Chapter 11 or even a Chapter 7 if the entity is going to pursue bankruptcy in order to secure repayment of those assessments. All of those are issues that the transition team should be empowered to deal with on behalf of the association.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, another issue, just if we've got a couple of seconds left here. This new developer that comes in, typically in the CC&Rs, we have what are called developer easements. So the developer retains the right to cross over your common area to construct later phases in the development. Is this new successor developer going to have those same rights? Is the new successor developer going to have the right to post signs and use a lot for sales purposes and use the common area for sales purposes? All of those are issues which will come into play if there's any problem with your current developer. You need to consult with counsel and look at your governing documents to see if they provide those same rights to a successor developer. And finally, if you're going to have a successor developer come in, you want to look at a document called the development agreement, which typically flows between the city or county and the original developer to decide whether or not this new developer is going to be bound by the same agreement.
Wow, it's enough to make your head spin, but that's just how complex it can be, isn't it?
It is absolutely a complex and fascinating issue, frankly.
And we need the homeowners that are moving into all these developments to really be aware of the fact that there are this many idiosyncrasies and nuances involved. It's not just as easy as buying a new house and saying, how come this isn't done yet?
Exactly. And I think there's been so much focus given in the past about construction defects. Folks, that's the merest, smallest part of the issues that pertaining to developer transition. Much more, how do I say, much more serious issues for the average homeowner and the average association are the ones we've mentioned. How do you get the common area in the proper condition? How do you make sure title is in good shape? How do you make sure warranties are in your hands and honored? All of those, I think, affect the average new homeowner much more deeply than the old issues of construction defects.
Okay. Again, we could do another show on this, I'm sure, but again, thank you for coming. We really appreciate this and want to have you on the show again. Thanks. Mary Howell from the firm of Epstein, Grinnell & Howell. My name is Mike Livingston. I'm your host here on the CAI Report. Come back, see us again. We look forward to having you back.